Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing to the channel or becoming a patron at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics.
Hey everybody, welcome to Afterlife Topics. I know it's been a little while since I put any videos up. I've been kind of taking a break, really with so many personal changes in terms of like my psychic abilities, as well as work, like non sort of afterlife related stuff. Basically has made me have to just take a little time off. But that said, I do want to jump back on the wagon and tell you guys about some new interesting things that I have learned now since basically developing this interfacing ability with people on that side. So that said, and sorry if I sound distracted. I'm like looking down at my audio meter, making sure that I'm not too loud and not too quiet. I went to film school, and audio, as you can probably tell from watching this channel, was one of the reasons I almost gave up on trying to make film and things like that, because nothing like doing a wedding video only to find out during post-production that the audio is overmodulated and then you proceed to just completely freak out. But anyway, that's it. Let's go ahead and jump into today's topic, which concerns life on the other side, more basic elements. So again, we are talking about specifically what it's like to live in this other dimension, this other reality that people sometimes call the afterlife, and also the astral plane of existence. This is a lovely photo I found, which I think encapsulates very well of the types of places that we see when we cross over. And in particular, I would classify this could be fifth density, it could be sixth density. It looks a little bit more like six to me. Luminous and beautiful environments that are just beyond imagination. And obviously, this is just a poor representation. In the prior video, we talked about colors that exist there, which do not exist here. We talked about a color called Orla and another color. These are the actual names of colors that exist there, which do not exist here. Primary colors, okay? So basically on our side, we have, yellow and blue and red and green. There might say yellow, blue, red, green, Orla. Like this is their vocabulary and this is their life. And I've been trying to document all of this down since beginning, this rocky road toward being an interfacer, which I will explain in a moment. So this is kind of part 2 of my prior video, and we're going to look at more topics and more important things that you need to know about to understand what it's like when you die. So let's continue. The first point is called telepathy and interfacing, and so this is the world that I was thrown into when I began developing this skill. And those of you who watch this channel, it began with dowsing rods. It began with a communicator named Lorna, who described herself as an angelic being. And then the communication was hijacked by an Arcturian guy who was also a guide who was basically being manipulated by negative thought form entities, which sounds so weird, but basically this guide who had always been in my life was being passively, kind of like being passive aggressive and impersonating my other guide and giving me wrong information. So there was this whole cutoff period where I had to basically like delete areas of bad information. But in essence, the beginning of my communications with Lorna were real. Lorna eventually became, thanks to KJ, a thought form entity which duplicated her, which again is absolutely weird. Lorna also comes from a different entire universe, which is also super weird. And welcome to the wonderful world of trying to figure out shit that's going on the other side, because it breaks all the rules, everything that we think we understand, everything that is about our reality that makes sense to us. It all gets thrown out the window when you begin dealing with people on that side. Everything that we think we know about it from this 3D reality, everything that we think we know about this 3D reality gets tossed out the window. The other side is a very, very wild place with thought forms and parallel universes and parallel realities and this type of ET species and that type of ET species. And you have mythological characters that are coming to life at you, and subplane, demiplane creations, all stuff that we've all known about for many years through my astral experiences. And it's why some of you guys got confused on this channel really bad, and that's the unfortunate issues concerning this unpredictability. But since then, I have gotten much, much better. I don't even use the dowsing rods now. I now have a direct interfacing ability where I can directly communicate in my mind to people, and it comes through to me as loud and clearly as if I were talking on Zoom to somebody. It did not start off this way, but I did rapidly progress. And people I'm working with right now are also rapidly progressing in this ability. So while I do think I have a really cool starseed background that's allowing me to learn fast, I also think this is something anybody can do. And that is why I'm really fascinated by it. So enough about that. Let's go ahead and look at this slide, which is called Telepathy and Interfacing. So this is the first big concept because we're talking about how do people communicate on that side. And they communicate mentally, but they also can communicate verbally. So it's a combination. And I never quite understood how it worked until now that I'm doing it. So these are basic terms for communication, and there is more than one type of these things. So in reference to telepathy, there is something called a direct telepathic link-up. This is the basic communication combined sometimes with verbal communication. And I've done this for many years in my astral states. You can look at someone, pick them out from across the street and begin talking to them, and they'll be like, who the heck are you and why are you talking to me? And I'll be like, because I'm astral projecting and trying to get information back from my YouTube channel. And they're like, oh, WTF. And this was how I would be doing things for a long time, and the stuff that went into my books. If you hear me sipping tea, I am sipping Moroccan mint tea because this is going to be a long video, and well, I need to drink a little bit of tea to keep my, mouth lubricated. So this kind of direct telepathic ability is an astral ability, which means very few people can do it here, except maybe like the ones who can end up being studied by the government, or they end up in some Russian laboratory being monitored by people with white coats on. That's how rare a direct telepathic link-up is. Now there's another kind of communication called interfacing. This is sharing thoughts between two people, and it can be done by us with them. So this is the difference. They can come down from their higher dimension, and they can come down into our dimension and begin interfacing with us. In this case, we cannot read their, we cannot read deeply into who they are, but they can gain full access to all of our thoughts and memories if they want to. So yes, if that sounds a little freaky, it's because, well, it's pretty intimate. On the other side, people communicate telepathically, but if you're around close friends and family or lovers, then you will communicate by interfacing, when you can share memories and feelings, and it's this very intimate way of communicating. That is their way of talking to us, except we don't have a direct link up because they're higher dimensional. In their words, if we were able to suddenly interface into their thoughts and the way that their mind works as higher dimensional beings, then it could literally kill us. It would be impossible. And that's why, based upon laws of physics, we simply wouldn't be able to interface back with a higher dimensional person. But what we can do is do it on the surface where we can hear their thoughts and we can talk back and forth, but they can go into our minds and they can pick out all times, they pick out memories, they can pick out experiences, and do all that kind of stuff. So that is in essence how it works. If you are living on fifth density and you are interfacing with somebody, that would mean that, well, both of you can share memories and thoughts. You can pull memories out of their life and talk about it. Like, it's a very intimate and special way of communicating, but it's also the only way of communicating that we have the ability to do on third density. We can also learn to do it with each other here on this planet, believe it or not. So, and the terminology that I might put out for what I just described is called indirect interfacing. So it is not a complete direct link up, but this allows us to talk to them and allows you to be able to talk to them. So I think that's most for this. So, the main point for this slide is that this is also their terminology. They call it interfacing. They don't, they distinguish between the two. And you can learn to do this. In fact, if you think that you are interfacing with a guide or somebody, I'll help you. I mean, if you donate, that's great, but I've been helping people do it for free because my guides are telling me we have to get the information out there to create a domino effect right now. It's very important that that those dominoes begin basically getting knocked down and people start learning how to do this. This is what my guides tell me. It's critically important. Next slide, timelines. Oh God. This has been obviously a struggle to deal with because you remember at the intro of this video, I talked about a timeline mess up that happened, and it accidentally cloned 2 copies of my friend Lorna during all that confusion mumbo jumbo that happened. And I told you why it happened, and that right away will give you, hopefully I don't want to make people paranoid, but I will tell you from the get-go, I had a feeling when I was talking to KJ, my Arcturan guide, that there was something manipulating him. There was something behind the scenes going on. And then when I was talking to Lorna, I had a sense that it maybe wasn't her. Because in this case, it was her being impersonated. So it was like our friend KJ was in a trance, and these things were taking control of the wheel. Now, does that mean this can happen to anyone? No. Our friend KJ, very difficult job, a lot of stress, psychological issues, and a lot of problems that he developed that he should have known better by going and doing spiritual practices, just like here. And he must have gotten involved with some pretty dark stuff. And yes, this is how real life can be, even if you're dealing with an extraterrestrial. We're all souls and we're all fallible. And so somehow his actions led to basically a kind of negative thought form that manifested inside his brain, and it had to be electromagnetically removed. So why am I bringing all this up? Because what he did was he created a timeline mishap where suddenly these angelic beings that I was communicating to, they got thrown into a different timeline created by him that he was controlling and being the puppeteer for, because he thought that they weren't even real to begin with. He thought that they were my imagination and that he was teaching me a lesson and all this convoluted, really just nonsense. But what it came down to is that's what happened. Those were the after effects of a sloppy timeline being generated. So what comes down to timelines is that on that side, this kind of stuff can happen very easily and smoothly, and you know when it happens. On that side, if someone who's a very powerful mind creates a timeline and then pulls a thought form or somebody out of it, then it happens in real time, right? You can be focusing on a fictional character and being in communication with them, and eventually they will manifest into your reality as a real person, although their consciousness is probably going to be very much linked up to your own. In fact, their entire timeline, the little pocket universe where they came from, is also going to probably be pretty much linked up to your own consciousness. And a lot of the time, if you stop thinking about them, they will disappear. In my situation, what happened is it was kind of like historical fiction. And so what happened is it was written over on top of, well, people who were real already. So their consciousness was already synced up to their other halves. And so this created an effect, which is actually, it's very illegal for somebody to do this on that side. So it was a huge mishap. But again, my guide was under the influence. But, it's obviously there's many ethical reasons you don't want to create a timeline like that where you start cloning and duplicating other versions of people. If you want to know what people do on the other side to keep them busy and keeping the order in place and being able to regulate their society, this is what people have to deal with all the time. No pun intended, all the time. People on that side have to stop, prevent timeline issues. So one important point here is that here on the Earth plane, it's a lot more tangled up than there. So this is directly from my guide, Llewellyn, and she says the Earth plane of third density is a mess of or a tangled web of people on different timelines than each other. It's as if everyone is in their own world. From our side, it looks like everything is continually shifting and changing, but you think it is static. So from their side, there's a version of me that's sipping a cup of tea, and there's a version of me that's not, based upon whatever decisions I made at that moment. And higher dimensional beings, especially Llewellyn, because she is seventh density, they have the ability to just see through all of it and look at all of these alternating timelines as they're happening, and they can even interact with them and the versions of you on those timelines. Apparently, the Earth plane, or third density, is the biggest tangled web of all. When we cross over, it's a lot less tangled up. It's almost as if we're going closer to objective reality, and in Llewellyn's words, we are closer to living in a dream on this reality. After we die, timelines tend to converge easier, especially the higher up you go, as I just said. Timelines ultimately weave in and out of each other, as I just explained. A timeline with a different set of circumstances is still the same people in a way. It's not like everyone is always getting cloned, but people can get cloned if you pull them out of a different timeline and then manifest them into your timeline, which again is illegal and you're not supposed to do that. Let me take a drink of tea. Because then suddenly you'll have a doppelganger. And this is something you'll see. There is people who have twins because of some timeline thing that somebody messed up, which is why you really shouldn't even mess with this type of thing when you cross over, because you could create nasty effects like this. But yes, they're weaving in and out of each other, so it's almost like there's different timelines collapsing, that we're all collapsing continually and splitting off continually into different versions of us on an infinite basis. But that infinite basis, I mean, it merges together based especially on probabilities, right? So timelines that are improbable collapse. That's another very important Arcturan lesson for you guys, is that let's say you have your leg amputated, God forbid, and you think, I'm going to use the secret to bring my leg back. Well, there's no probable way for that timeline to exist, right? There's no physical ability for that to happen. So you cannot will your severed leg back into existence again, right? So maybe you can get on a timeline where a wonderful prosthetic leg is developed, right? It has to operate within the realm of probability. If somebody tries to enter a timeline that is impossible, then it collapses in on itself. If somebody tries to create a pocket universe that is completely improbable, it will collapse in on itself, and essentially, if any consciousness in that world became sentient, it would be collapsed in on itself and basically kill them. Again, very unethical if you just mess with this on your own. The Arcturan civilization are masters of this, so an Arcturan created timeline is constructed through many people over a long period of time to be a perfectly engineered timeline that follows natural laws of physics, where it all makes sense, and then it all will click together and people will begin living in that timeline basically as if it just, this is all naturally occurring. And people will then just expand from there into their own lives. It'll all synchronize and it'll make sense, and it won't even matter. It's not like the people on that timeline would be like, ooh, I was artificially created. It's as if they were always already there all along, right? Because we're dealing with that kind of, the universe is an infinite place. So yes, if you want to go into the universe of, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings, well, you have to find some Arcturans to carefully construct that, and so it makes sense, and now you have a universe based on that follows the laws of physics, and then that universe, according to the people in it, has always existed. As they say, they don't create the doors, they only open the doors. So Middle-earth is a door that exists somewhere that we could go through And then all they have to do is design it so they understand what is the realistic version that exists, and then they'll discover it having already been in existence. Then they can open the door and then you could potentially go into there. But again, advanced stuff, and the average person on the other side may know about this on an educational basis, but unless they, I don't know, go to an institute or they visit a species that is practicing this, they may not get to experience the real thing. Okay, you can create dream scenarios, you can do all this type of stuff, but to create it, being part of a true timeline, that is very special. It's a very confusing topic, and it's why higher dimensional beings are higher dimensional beings and we're not. I'm on this channel trying to deal with learning this stuff from the watered down version that they're giving this tiny monkey brain, because I'm a lower dimensional being. They're trying to send all this stuff into my monkey brain, and I'm banging some pots and pans together and trying to interpret it in a way that makes sense to give you guys. But that's how they describe it to me. Like, there's just things they can't even describe or talk about because it's beyond our comprehension. Now let's move to the next slide. The next area of terminology that they use over there, we use a little bit. It's called densities. Now, this is to us and my friends, including Lorna and Llewellyn, and another couple women that you might not imagine because they're a little bit famous in the saintly sense of the word, because let's just say very possibly I have been in communication with a woman known as Saint Catherine of Alexandria, because a lot of these higher density people who have assumed those roles, but she really is Saint Catherine of Alexandria, by the way. They really want to find telepaths like me to interface with so they can get messages out and help people and yada yada. So that's why it's been a busy time for me being able to communicate with these different levels. So anyway, in her words, The Law of One was a book written by, it's called The Raw Material, right? And it was kind of popular here. It was made much more popular here by one David Wilcock. It began to introduce the terminology of densities. So what they said is that book began getting preached like gospel on their world, including on 5th density, 6th density, like these higher levels. People began clinging to that book because they're those responsible for creating that book, and the guides who were in contact with Ra and all of this, it became this kind of cult religion on the other side. So now everybody uses the terminology densities. I'm 3rd density. Earth is shared with 3rd and 4th density, and 5th density and 6th density. And it's diverged from this book. And I've read most of The Law of One. It's a really tough book to read. And they actually kind of go off the rails in the book. So it adapted itself a little bit closer to how it really works. So another friend or communicator named Joan told me, 6th density, just throw that book away, Cyrus. She says, look, we use the terminologies now, but the book is really misleading about a lot of very important and crucial factors which could actually be a bit damaging. And yet, the terminology is very, very good. So that's the danger of like quasi-philosophies. Excuse me. The danger of that is when you get accurate information spun in with inaccurate information. The densities are accurate. Some of the histories of the Law of One are accurate. Who Ra is accurate. But the philosophical goal of the book, that we should just merge back into the highest density, that is not the goal of any soul who has 2 higher dimensional brain cells to rub together. The goal is to be the expression of God in the other densities. You can go to the source if you want, but when you're in the source, pretty much you come back and continue to experience and express life in the infinite ways that God allows us to do it, the one infinite creator. So the Law of One has this kind of weird philosophy that would essentially send people off to, merge with source, and that, I've probably ranted about this enough on the channel, which doesn't, it's the antithesis of what most beings, most powerful beings, want or are looking for. In fact, oftentimes higher dimensional beings are wanting to come back down here to third density because they want to go where it's tough and they want to challenge themselves and expand their soul. Lorna, my other communicator, another angelic being, explained to me that basically that kind of philosophy, it's very similar to, let's say, the expansion of consciousness and the degradation of the soul. Moving up densities is the expansion of consciousness, but it doesn't mean that somebody on a higher density is a good and moral and just person by default. You have to come down here and work things out and learn these lessons to become a good, moral, and just person. So this is all important kind of preamble of understanding densities, because the density part, though, makes sense. So what it comes down to is first density, second density. These are what we would think of as lower life forms, bugs, cockroaches. They have a way of perceiving the universe, which is very similar to how we perceive the world around us, very differently than somebody on the density above us who is in what we call the astral plane. So the way the cockroach experiences the universe, or the world that it's on, it's like an entirely different world. It has no conscious perception of what we are able to perceive because it lives on first density. A squirrel might live on second density, but we humans are on third density, and we've been moving into fourth density, which is a higher, like, not to toot my own horn, but me having all these interfacing and telepathic skills as my consciousness expanding and going into fourth, which still shares the same visual reality. And then by the time you get to fifth, you're not even compatible here anymore, and you will disappear from view. And you will become a fifth dimensional person, and as a result, you are now on the other side in what we call the afterlife, or the astral plane. Happens automatically when your heart stops beating. You switch that higher consciousness, and there you are. But we cannot equate higher consciousness with being a better person. And in the words of Joan and St. Catherine and Lorna, if you do that, you are actually on a very dangerous path in life, because higher consciousness does not mean a greater soul. These are two different concepts. We must expand our consciousness and expand our souls. And when we're on higher consciousness levels, they're beautiful and exalted in places that we literally cannot imagine. However, yes, on those levels, our hearts can open up, and we can become the lovely and wonderful people we want to be. We can expand our souls, but it's also possible to go to the top and not have an expanded soul. That's the issue with the law of one, why we have to be very careful with that book. So again, fifth density fades into a new earth. Sixth density and above fades into another earth. It's the same earth on different vibratory levels. But fifth to sixth, again, to give you an example, a cockroach is first density. I'm fourth density right now. That means that fourth to fifth is kind of like, I don't know. I'm not that far away from it, and maybe you're not either. It's just a fifth density person is going to have a vastly expanded ability of consciousness. Sixth density is going to be more kind of like the consciousness difference between, well, me and a squirrel, right? So the squirrel has its way of perceiving reality, and we can look at the squirrel and pat it and love the squirrel. But there's a level of consciousness difference between those two beings, right? And so the sixth density entity, just like when we're patting our dog and we're kind of like on the dog's level, they're coming down to our level to basically pat the little squirrels that are humans. It doesn't make us any less important because, well, obviously we can still do rational thought and we can do things squirrels can't do. Right? So it's not a perfect metaphor at all, but technically it is. And again, if we want to compare, let's say somebody on third density, and again, this has nothing to do with quality of character or superiority. If someone is here on a lower level of consciousness and they are interacting with a sixth density being, it would be the same as you or me interacting with a moth. That's how different the levels of consciousness are, and how much more advanced. Like, can you tell your moth to, can that moth help you do your taxes? Well, I'd love to meet that moth if a moth could. As you can see, there's things that people on 5th and 6th understand that they can't even explain to us. Even if I'm on 4th density, there's things that they just cannot explain to us. It's beyond our comprehension, and there's things on the 6th level that are beyond the comprehension of people on the 5th level. 7th level is another Earth. Again, the same Earth on an even higher level. 7th level beings, it is ridiculous. Everything I've learned about them, every single person that I've spoken to, both astrally now as well as through interfacing, that I've spoken to about this have expressed that the 7th density person is now so almost infinite in its nature of expanded consciousness that they are what we'd call gods. They are no longer subject to timelines. They are no longer subject to so many things, to parallel universes. You can't duplicate a 7th density person. A 7th density person exists singularly. They will always be just that singular being, which is, again, what we think of as a god. To go from 6th to 7th may take a little while. I don't know. A few million years, maybe a billion years. It's not a direct path. But getting to 6, it's actually can be kind of a snap. People who have near-death experiences and go to beautiful, luminous, glorious places that you hear about in advanced near-death experiences, they're going to the 6th level. So we can go from Earth to 6 straight away. But most of us go from Earth to 5th. And 5th is wacky and wonderful, but it's a lot like this world too. And I mean a lot. 8th and above is that God consciousness experience. And this is where the law of one was also getting a lot of info wrong. There really isn't something above the 7th level. And yeah, it does match 7 levels of heaven. That's some kind of a rough translation that came out of the scriptures. By above 7th, it doesn't actually, in a way, truly go above 7th, because what happens is you go into pure God consciousness experiences, which you can actually access even from below 7. If you're 5th or 6th, if you created meditation, you can access the super dimensional existence where you become all that is and all that ever was. You can step into that. And what happens after? Well, if you want, then you can leave that and then just come back down and do whatever you want. An 8th and above is, by design, a temporary experience, because your existence is as an individual entity of God itself who can experience and explore the world, right? So it would be a mistake to think that the point of life is to get to the 8th level and then absorb back into God. So my communicators tell me, please, Cyrus, tell your group, tell your community, don't put that on as the goal. The goal is progression of the soul, not just progression of consciousness. So if you're just seeking out consciousness states, a path many go on, you'll end up like even 7th density beings who even at that level end up confused and going on a path that kind of leads to what is in effect either their annihilation, or they become horribly disappointed because they decide to permanently become part of God, and then they get the rude wake-up call that God actually wants that person back on the lower levels again to experience existence. So I think it's a really important point, because they keep hammering home with me saying, Cyrus, tell your community these important points. Law of One has excellent information in it, but the main premise and the premise of other religions and philosophies that discount the progression of the soul, well, these are very like religious-y figures I'm talking to, and I'm not a religious person. And in a weird way, they're not really religious people either, but they lived on Earth and they became what we would think of as angels, quote. And but they still see things through that lens a little bit. They basically say, look, it's sanctimonious, It's heretical in a sense to believe that the goal of life is to forget about becoming a better person. Finally, we can kind of say it's more accurate for some people to say it's just 4 levels if you want to discount what bugs think. But then I talked to other communicators who are like, no, 7 levels, actually really 8 levels, is the accurate idea about the states of consciousness that we enter into. Okay, now, boy, we're getting through these slides tonight. I know it's a lot of information to cover, and you might have to like mop your brain up off the floor at this point. If you do, I'm totally with you on that, because I've had to do that many times as I've been taking all the notes and trying to get this information down to teach to people. But I want to continue from the prior video about materializations. That is to say, creating, when you're on the, quote, astral plane or fifth density, it's about creating things with your mind. And what people don't realize is that it's linked to your mind. If you stop thinking about it, it will disappear after a while. One of my communicators, I think it was Lorna, explained to me, if you could materialize anything you want and it just stays in the environment forever, ours would be a giant world of refuse, because they're still living in a real environment. What happens if you materialize, a bobby pin or a ballpoint pen or apple, whatever, and then what do you do with it? If the materialized objects didn't just disappear on their own, then really all of reality would just start to, it would be a very different and very bad place to be. This is why, again, laws of physics and natural laws have to be in place, and because they are naturally, it's just the way that things have to be. As a result, quote, physical reality is extremely important. That's why, if you remember, in all my books and all my videos over the years, I'm trying to stress this point. This was my guides writing through me, trying to get this information out. It wasn't until I began talking to my guides that I realized the great significance of it all. Physical reality is still something that exists on all densities. There is that which is created with the mind, which is connected to the mind, and then there is that which is available to all beings. Even on the 7th level, which is the godly level of existence, same thing. And also, on that note, you'd be surprised because I've now interfaced with 2 7th density people, and they were really, really amazing. Llewellyn is one of them. But there's still, it's like, you can tell that besides being gods who have they don't have infinite existences, but it's pretty damn close to it. They still have, like, when their organic personality comes through, they're not that different than us. And yes, they could be filtering their consciousness down to like a tiny fraction of what they are, but their soul and personality will keep coming out. And they can have flaws too, and we can discuss things that, I've given advice to 7th density beings at this point that has actually helped them. I'm encouraging one of them, her name is Shayla, and she is also of my kind of starseed group, to actually come back to Earth on 5th density because she wants to become a Colombian woman. Like, that's where her heart is. She wants to come down here and get back into the nitty-gritty of things, coming back from all the way up there. And actually, I said Shayla. Her name is like Sheila. It's like Sheala. Another very interesting communicator who I was able to touch bases with through Llewellyn. So I know I'm off topic, but it's just a lot of cool stuff that I want to talk about. So back to materializations. If you lose concentration, your thoughts are no longer locked on it, and it will dissipate. I've done this many times astrally. It's a great thing to practice and learn, and yet, especially on the 5th density where most of us go, it's fundamentally not that practical. I mean, you can eat an apple that you materialize, and then the apple that comes into your astral stomach, it dissipates. You don't get a satisfaction out of eating it. So people don't like to eat materialized food. Remember the Leslie Flint recordings? She'd always have a materialized cup of tea waiting for her. Yeah, that's nice if you want to drink some materialized tea, but you're going to have a desire to get the real thing. I've always suspected it, and now I confirm it. Okay, so there is one more slide, one more big concept on this crazy-ass video. It's called webways. Webways concerns space travel. And sometimes they also call it like the grid or whatever the case may be, but here's what it comes down to. We can materialize and dematerialize ourselves on that side. As I've always known, you're sitting in Arizona, you want to go to Japan, poof, you go to Japan. You want to go to London, poof, you're in London. You want to go to work, poof, you're at work. You want to, go boating, poof, you're at your boat. Because the time-space thing gets changed, flipped around. But what if you want to go, I don't know, to Arcturus? You want to go to a different planet. It's not that simple. Instead, that connection is going to suffer from latency. So one of my communicators explains to me, let me think, who was it? Might have been Joan, might have been Lorna. Space is not actually empty. Space is filled with information, energy systems, and a lot more. There's nothing empty about space. Moving through all that stuff, well, a webway navigator, a starship navigator, knows how to navigate through that to get to the distance they need to get to with maximum efficiency. So starship operators, UFO pilots, whatever, they are webway navigators. What they're doing is they are rapidly materializing and dematerializing the ship so fast that it just actually feels and looks like you're just traveling through space. But what they're doing is navigating through those webways to find the most efficient way through all that mess of stuff they're traveling through. Because when you're materializing or dematerializing yourself, you are you're pushing up against all those things. And what does this mean in practical terms? Well, we're looking at about 1 light year a minute. Pretty darn fast. To get to Arcturus, 20 or 30 minutes by starship. If you want to get to a galaxy on the other side of the universe, you might be in that starship for months, right? And this does happen. So even on the other side, which seems so limitless, it's not limitless. And it shouldn't be, because if there weren't webways, that would also, I think, probably mess everything up. It would, this is the laws of physics that have to be in place. It would collapse that reality. So if you want to go to, I don't know, Squandrax 16, the great spiral galaxy, I'm just making crap up, then and it's 10 billion light years away, well, that would take a really long time, wouldn't it? Because what is, is 10 billion light years even a thing? I don't think so. Okay, let's say it's 500 million light years away, right? If you're going 1 light year a minute by going through webways, well, that would take a heck of a long time, right? Fortunately, you can communicate with someone from Squanderox 16 through interfacing with them and through quantum entanglement-based systems, so you don't have to wait 500 million minutes to get there, because that is a heck of a long time. So again, the rapid teleportation creates the illusion of space travel. It is called webway navigation. This, my friends, is the best estimate of my research, what I understand about life there. And it's not just from my recent communications. I started hinting at some of this by books, like The Afterlife and Beyond. So, I mean, it's very important stuff to get a grip on what the culture and society and life is like there. And I don't think anyone has actually brought this kind of stuff forward before me. And so I'm very happy about that, because I'm always on this channel trying to get the practical information to you guys, even if I have to battle through misinformation and issues. But don't take my word for any of this, okay? Don't take my word for it. Do your own research and ask your mediums to confirm the things I just talked about, because we need objective confirmation. So bring it up to your medium friends, or access your own guides, talk to them about this, and then let me know in the comments or email me what they say. So, right. Thanks for getting through this video with me. I know it's a lot of information. You're probably going to have to re-watch it a couple times. But that is okay. You can get involved at Afterlife Topics or become a patron to support this work at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics. Email me or anything like that. It definitely can help keep this whole thing going. I can also consult with you one-on-one if you want to do that. So just get in touch with me down below. And of course, subscribing to this channel, very important. Let me know what you thought of all this information. Let's see some big posts in the comments about it. And let's most importantly see what your sources say about this stuff too. This is Cyrus from Afterlife Topics. I'll catch you guys on the next video.